Hello, good evening. Thanks for being with us. I'm Blake Burman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. So, he showed up on Capitol Hill today, but Dr. Kevin O'Connor not saying much of anything beyond his name. Why did former President Joe Biden's doctor plead the Fifth? Plus, the Trump administration's battle against the most elite universities. Today, Harvard. The president calling that school, quote, anti-Semitic. Are the Crimson about to lose their accreditation? Also tonight, we are live in Texas. More than 160 people still missing. Edward Graham from Samaritan's Purse joins us on the hope that still remains in Hill country. But first tonight, here from the Hill, the president responds after two attacks targeting law enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection in the recent days.
A long time in jail, a long time. And one got hit yesterday in the neck. And he fortunately is going to be okay, but he got hit yesterday in the neck. No good.
The president there is referring to an Independence Day ambush. Federal authorities now charging at least 10 suspects for what's being described as a planned attack on the 4th of July. Fireworks first set off, likely to try to lure law enforcement outside of the Prairie Land ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas. The armed suspect showed up with tactical gear and struck an officer in the neck. And then just days later, on Monday, a man with an assault rifle fired dozens of rounds at a Border Patrol facility in McAllen, Texas, near the border. A local officer who responded shot in the leg. Our Allie Bradley live tonight on what she is hearing from the agents that she speaks with every day out there on the front line. But first to our Kellie Meyer live tonight as the president. Kellie was asked about this several times today over there at the White House.
Yeah, that's right, Blake. President Trump calling Democrats deranged today, saying he will do anything to protect law enforcement agents, with the White House telling Democratic lawmakers to tone down their rhetoric against federal immigration officers. The president also slamming Democrats for pushing for a bill requiring federal immigration law enforcement officers to not wear face masks and have legible IDs while on the job.
When people picket in front of Columbia, in front of Harvard, and they have masks on, more than masks, I mean, you can't see anything, nobody complains about that. But when a patriot who works for ICE or Border Patrol puts a mask on so that they won't recognize him and his family, there's a problem with that.
And the president said not allowing these officers to wear masks when needed could put them in danger. Blake.
Our Kellie Meyer live tonight on the North Lawn. Kellie, thank you. Our Allie Bradley has been speaking with these agents as she does all the time on the recent attacks. Allie joins us live from Del Rio, Texas, with what she is hearing from them tonight. Allie?
Yeah, hey, Blake, you talk about the danger that these agents and officers are in every single day on the front lines, and that is something we're seeing in the interior every single day across the nation. And Border Patrol agents that I talk to, they're involved in the interior enforcement as well, and they're frustrated. They're frustrated with the level of assaults reaching nearly 700%. That's what DHS is saying when compared to this time last year. So they're frustrated that it is going up. They're frustrated that their operations are being compromised and that their safety is also being compromised. We've been out there several times with agents who have been trying to conduct target enforcement. That means they're going after someone very specific, like an Iranian national that is flagged for deportation, that has a criminal history. What's happening here is these protesters, these advocates are circling these vehicles. They're bashing out windows. They're getting aggressive. They're violent towards agents and officers. And the agents and officers are just trying to conduct that operation, something that they're saying is very important. Again, it's a target. It's not necessarily a Home Depot roundup that we're talking about. We're talking about specific targets that these ops are being blown left and right. Now, we've actually been out there with the assistant chief who's on the ground there from the El Centro sector. He's in LA, and there was actually posts that were tagged with my name and all of these phone numbers for that assistant chief, trying to dox him, to put his information out there. He said he's not worried about it. He puts his name out there openly. But Blake, the Chief Bovino, who is running those operations, he says he's regularly getting death threats, something that he is concerned about. But he said, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to stop these operations. Blake.
Wow. Our Allie Bradley live tonight in Del Rio, Texas. Allie, thank you. The president today suggesting that when it came to the assault at the ICE facility, it very well, he believes, could have been funded.
There is money being put behind people, when you look at the weapons they have, the newness of the weapons, rifles that just came out and they have the latest model. So there's something going on, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
Joining us now here on the Hill, Congressman Pete Sessions, a Republican from the great state of Texas. Congressman, thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate it. You hear the president there saying, quote, there is something going on, believing that there's possibly funding behind this. Do you believe that to be the case?
Well, in fact, it has been that way for quite some time. The left is funded by people who wish to undermine not just capitalism, but really the rule of government and the role of government directly in America. So the Soros type environment has been used.
It's a pretty broad statement, though, Congressman. And so I wonder to these specific incidents if you believe that's the case.
Well, once again, as I alluded to, and it is a broad statement, we have seen things in the past. District attorneys, rule of law, courts, those things that have been compromised and utilized by outside people outside of where they might be. They would have formed them around the country. Do I believe that there is a plan here that could be coordinated and orchestrated? I think we ought to look. I did not say there is. I said it would not surprise me.
The White House says, the administration says, rather, that assaults against ICE officers up 700%. You heard our Allie Bradley there. Why do you believe that's the case?
Well, I believe that this is a fight. The drug cartels that we know had literally complete control of the Mexican border, the southern border coming in to the United States. They charged a lot of money to people to be able to come here. We are harming their business model. They made hundreds of thousands of dollars every day, hundreds of millions over the 4 years that President Biden was there. And it guaranteed their ability to place people in the United States. And it's no different than them having their own marketing organization all across the country, followed up by fentanyl from China that came through Mexico. So there's no question in my mind that federal law enforcement sees firsthand the organizations that come against them. And so if you were going to, just like in a gang war, if you were going to take over someone's market, if you were going to threaten that, they fight back with violence. And that is the experience that we've seen from South America.
Pete Sessions is a Republican from the state of Texas. Some of this happening in his backyard and many of the cities nearby. With us tonight here on the Hill. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Joining me now, former chief of staff in the first Trump administration, Mick Mulvaney, NewsNation contributor as well, and Chris Stirewalt, host of the Hill Sunday, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Hello to you both. Thanks for being here. You heard the president there talk about masks. You actually take the other side of the argument.
On the masks, yeah,
Why?
I do. I don't think American law enforcement should wear masks. I really don't. I think it sends the wrong message. American law enforcement is a force of good. Guys that wear masks are the bad guys. I recognize the fact there's risks. There's a lot of risks. There's a risk to working in the building behind us. You just suck it up. That's part of the job. And I think most of the men and women who do that for a living know that there's a certain risk when you go into that line of work. If someone shows up at my door in the middle of the night with a mask on, I'm probably shooting them.
So there's this legislation from Democrats on this very issue, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that they don't wear masks. Mick Mulvaney, you're siding with the Democrats here?
I'm siding with the folks who think American law enforcement is a force for good and not evil. I hate to politicize it, but again, that's a very small piece of what we're talking about. The attack on ICE folks is outrageous. We should talk about that as well. But when it comes to wearing masks, no, I don't want to go down that road where the good guys are wearing masks.
Just remind me never to go trick or treating at Mick's house.
Mick's house?
It's a very dangerous situation.
In the Carolinas?
Masked at the door. I couldn't agree with you more. The mask thing. So basically what you have going on is, and I don't know whether you saw the most recent recruitment ad for ICE. They're in a chopper. It's very military, right? The vibe is very military. And Homeland Security which was a bad idea. The concept of a Department of Homeland Security turned out not to be a very good idea. The consolidation of all these agencies turned out not to be a very good idea. But one of the problems is we don't use military power inside the United States. We use military power against our enemies overseas. And what is happening now is the president wants to declare a war. He has declared a de facto war, which is the premise for why we get to deport people without hearings, why it's the Alien Act, and we're doing all of this stuff. I don't know why these crazy people or wicked people are attacking ICE agents, but I can tell you that the response will be more masks, more militarized enforcement inside the United States. This is the ratcheting up that the administration on some level wants.
So the conversation first started at the border, right? And that conversation is pretty much ended because both sides, Democrats and Republicans, will say the president was right with how he handled the border. Then it moved to mass deportations and how that should and should not be handled. And now comes these incidents, Chris, which are criminal, abhorrent, every word, right? To ascribe to that. But it seems as if, unfortunately, this has now, been brought up based off of what we've seen here in the last week.
Well, listening to the president and Congressman Sessions took a more temperate line on this. But you hear the narrative from the president, and it is, this is being funded by outside bad people, that extra actions are going to have to be taken here. I haven't seen any evidence that this is, so far, that this is anything other than either, like I say, crazy or wicked people inside the United States.
They'll find out. I mean,
Yeah.
That's one of the things we can do here. Law enforcement is going to get to the bottom of it and find out what it is. I would be, if I'm in the White House and these guys show up with brand new equipment and they happen to know where all the ICE people are, I'm going to wonder if some of these protests are funded by anybody. My mind actually doesn't go to the George Soroses of the world. My mind goes to the guys, to Pete Sessions' point, who made all of the money of getting people in the country in the first place. Smuggling people into this country was big business, and there's a lot of people south of the border losing a lot of money who have a great vested interest in seeing that old system come back, and they'll spend a lot of money. I remember touring the border when I was in the White House, and I remember seeing these drones fly up and down and say, "Oh, that's kind of cool. We're using drones." And the border agents say, "No, that's not ours. Those are the bad guys. That's how much money they make. Some of their tech is really good." So, yeah, granted, it's early. We don't know the facts yet, but I hope we do get to the bottom of it. I wouldn't be surprised if it is the criminal operations in Mexico.
Chris, Mix, see you both later in the show. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Still to come tonight here on the Hill. Speaking of Texas, we are live on the ground. Our Brian Enton on what he's seeing. Edward Graham from Samaritan's Purse on the hope that still remains in the Hill country tonight. Plus, a new twist in the battle between Trump and Harvard. Is the Ivy League about to lose its accreditation? Top official over at the White House joins me here on set in a moment. Plus this.
This is something I think every American is concerned about. I think every American wants to know the truth.
Why did Joe Biden's White House doctor today plead the fifth? I thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Blake Burman. I'll see you on the other side of the break. 4 minutes away. Stay with us. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. Tonight, an escalation in the Trump administration's battle against the nation's elite institutions, the Department of Education, Health and Human Services as well, today threatening Harvard's accreditation, claiming the Ivy League violated anti-discrimination laws by not protecting Jewish students from harassment. Now, if Harvard loses that status, some of the possible consequences include loss of access to federal financial aid for students, loss of federal research funding, and an inability to enroll international students, a loss of degree recognition, and overall damage to the reputation, of course. Now, the president asked about this earlier today.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Harvard's been very bad, totally anti-Semitic. And, yeah, they'll absolutely reach a deal.
The Department of Homeland Security also says it will subpoena Harvard for, quote, relevant information, end quote, about its international students and exchange program. Joining me live here on the Hill, May Mailman. She is the White House's senior policy strategist. By the way, also a Harvard Law grad. Hello.
Hey, Blake.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. So I guess the bottom line question here is, what does the administration want out of Harvard?
Yeah, well, we want them to comply with the law. And also, and this is something that I've said on this show before, we want a good partner. So the federal government has a lot of options in who to give money to, who to give benefits to. And that entity should be somebody who's trustworthy, who uses that money well, and who's communicating with us, who tells us when foreign students are doing things that are endangering U.S. students. And Harvard has thus far not been that good partner, has not followed the law, and has not indicated that it wants to improve. And so now there's an opportunity. I think now they understand that we're serious. And so we look forward to Harvard being great again.
Is serious taking accreditation off the table? And if so, how would you even do that? Because as I understand it, accreditation isn't a government thing. There are private groups, right? Like the Higher Learning Commission, the New England Commission of Higher Ed. There's a handful of others as well. So how would you even go about doing it?
Yeah, so accreditors are supposed to ensure that universities follow basic things in order to be good universities. And so one of those things is that they have to be in basic compliance with federal law. So when we found officially a violation of Title VI last week, we sent that to the accreditor. The accreditor has an obligation to do something about it. If Harvard, which they are, is in violation of Title VI, then now the accreditor has to. Otherwise, the accreditor is not going to be recognized as a recognized accreditor.
So at the end of the day, like, you can't force them though, right? So I guess it gets to the point of, what exactly is the end goal here for the administration?
I think the end goal is that universities, all universities, but Harvard in particular, comply with federal law and be a great institution. When I say be a great institution, what I mean is use federal research dollars for things that actually improve Americans' lives, and otherwise treat people as equals and help our whole nation be a better place. If you're going to bring kids in there, indoctrinate them in racial ideology, which results in the harassment of Jewish students, then you're not actually serving that purpose that university is supposed to serve. And so Harvard, which considers itself a leader, and for good reason, has a lot to say and do here.
There's about 1,000 Jewish students at Harvard. Does the administration believe they're safe?
So I think even Harvard would say that they were not safe for a while.
Then, when there were the incidents on campus, what about now?
Yeah, so I don't know. So I think that the changes that need to be made are not just more police on campus, right? It's not just about safety. Safety really is about, do you treat Jewish students as equal, or do you treat them differently based on their national origin? And right now, Harvard treats individuals generally differently based on their race. The Supreme Court found this, that they treated white students and Asian students different than black students and Hispanic students. And so when Harvard has a racial system, then no, of course students aren't safe. You're being seen and treated on the basis of your national identity rather than on the basis of your individual quality.
Here was the Harvard response to the Trump administration. This was back in May. Quote, Harvard will not surrender its core legally protected principles out of fear of unfounded retaliation by the federal government. I heard President Trump there suggest that a deal could be reached. When and how close are you or are you not to whatever a deal may or may not look like with Harvard?
A deal could happen tomorrow if all Harvard were to do is agree to a very few things that the administration cares about, one of them being compliance with federal law. So absolutely a deal is on the table, which would be very beneficial to Harvard, and they would have access to these federal resources that they desperately want. As far as timing, that is up to Harvard. That really is up to Harvard.
All right, we'll leave it there. May Mailman, Senior Policy Strategist over at the White House. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank
Here
you.
on the Hill. Thanks, May. Appreciate it. All right, still much more ahead. Here tonight, we are live from Texas, other side of the break, as search crews try to bring closure to families of the flooding victims.
We ride and look and don't find anything, but we know there's lots of folks out here that need to be found, for sure.
Coming up here on the Hill, the son of the legendary Franklin Graham, about the difficult recovery efforts and the hope tonight in Hill Country. Plus, Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic nominee for New York City mayor. He called out President Trump today. What he said when the Hill returns.
don't care about my possessions or what we lost. That's not what's important. It's just those babies screaming out there and not be able to do anything for them. And I mean, this is my job. I have heavy equipment, and I'll sleep in the bed of my pickup. I don't care. I just got to keep my equipment, and we got to keep this stuff going, and we got to give closure to these hurting families.
An emotional interview there from our Marnie Hughes earlier today. Bud Bolton, Katie Sanders, two survivors in Kerrville, Texas. The couple watched as the torrential flooding swept away their home and their neighbors as well. 6:30 here in Washington tonight, 5:30 this afternoon in the Hill Country out there in Texas. At least 119 people are dead from the floods, more than 170 still missing, including 5 children and a counselor from Camp Mystic. Our Brian Enton live in Ingram, Texas, on the recovery that continues there. Brian?
Yeah, they actually just issued a flood advisory here. The rain has just started, so that's not good news for the people here. Look at this. This is Ingram, Kerr County. This was the big campground. This was a campsite, Blake. I mean, look at this. This is where people were camping out 4th of July when this tidal wave came through. Not far from where I'm standing right now, just about 2 hours ago, they found a 9-month-old out here who didn't make it, which was just awful. There was then a prayer circle with first responders. Just so sad to see. There's whole families that were swept away right from this spot. Still 161 people right in this area who are missing right now. I was just speaking to a woman who owns this campground who literally watched as people were floating away. Listen to what she said.
The screaming was horrific, and every time there was lighting, you can see cars floating away, but by the dozens. Sometimes when somebody was shining a light on it, you can see people on the windows of those vehicles banging on the windows.
To get out?
To get out.
I mean, just imagine seeing something like that, Blake. She's still shaken up about the whole thing. And it was interesting, you know, she wants to go to, there's a FEMA tent set up where you can go get assistance, but she didn't want to leave her house because there have been looters around, which is just awful. I mean, scum of the earth. They're still looking for 160 people out here, and there's been people spotted going around stealing tools, metal, you know, going through people's things. So she was afraid to leave her house. She wanted to keep a lookout for looters. Blake?
Brian, I see the rain, I hear the rain, and you said it was a flood watch or a flood warning?
Yeah, flood advisory went out. So just before we came on with you.
Yeah, how does that impact then the efforts of the crews there, and what are they telling the residents in that area, in and around that area?
Yeah, so it doesn't seem to be, I mean, there haven't been people coming around, you know, there was a Friday or Sunday and Monday that seemed more serious. They came around, they told people to get back from the river. We haven't seen anything like that happen this time. Obviously, people are on edge now, though. They sort of have PTSD with what they went through. So when the alert went out, people were kind of looking around up near where we were, near the, where the campground office is. But, you know, this hasn't happened since the 80s. So it's interesting, you know, the blame game in Washington, and people want to blame the feds, or they want to blame the, you know, the local leaders. But the people who actually live here haven't really talked much about blame. It's more just sadness and more wanting to find the 161 people who are still missing.
Brian Enton, live tonight in the middle of the devastation there. Brian, thank you. There are more than 2,000 people. Brian, you heard Brian talk about the volunteers there and the search crews. More than 2,000 of them volunteers working through Kerr County, Texas. And that includes the humanitarian organization Samaritan's Purse, founded by Billy Graham. Samaritan's Purse provides aid to people all across the world who are victims of natural disasters, war, and poverty. Joining me now is the Chief Operating Officer, Edward Graham. Just got back from Texas after meeting with survivors and volunteers. Edward, I appreciate your time tonight. You just listened to Brian, and you spoke to many of these folks and saw many of these stories. What stuck with you, and what do you think the folks in that area need this evening?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and appreciate you putting this in the news. I asked that your listeners, if they are watching this, pray for Texas. They're hurting, as you just heard your previous reporter, and the increase of the amount of lives that have been lost, but the numbers are going up, and there's still a lot missing. This is a time for grieving, and we need to give those families their space. But I agree with one thing he said specifically, where he talked about no one was blaming the government, local government. They weren't blaming the federal government. They're just hurting, and they want people, they need help. They don't know where to start in a time like this. And this is where Samaritan's Purse comes along, and we help muck out their homes. We cut back the drywall. We bring in a solution that prevents mold from growing, and we listen. We listen to the stories, and that's part of the grieving process. They need help. They don't know where to start. And we just come in and say, hey, you're loved. You're not forgotten. You're not forsaken. And they'll often ask, has God forsaken me? And the answer is no. He loved us so much, he sent his only son, Jesus, to die on a cross. But they're not angry. They're resilient. And I heard incredible stories of neighbors when they woke up. They told me they could hear the water gurgling under their bed, and their bed lifted up. And it rushed so quickly, then it was up to their shoulders. And so they move outside, they find their kayak, and this one house owner who can't even swim, she got her kayak, went to her neighbors, and got her elderly neighbors out and up to higher ground to safety. So when you hear horrible stories like this, there's also stories of heroes and people doing the right things, neighbors loving neighbors.
From your perspective, Edward, and we're showing some of the images from Samaritan's Purse. I believe you took some of these as well. From your perspective, amid all the devastation and amid all the grief and the frustration, the hope as you see it tonight for the folks in that area is?
Well, I think the hope right now is they want closure. And there's many of those that are struggling. They want to know where their loved ones are. But everyone talked about rebuilding already. They're already talking about, getting back. But this is a time for grief. There will be time for rebuilding, and Samaritan's Purse won't go until the job's done. But there was no anger. There was no bitterness. There may be frustration because they think they're alone, and there's the shock. Many are still in shock. And so just pray for these families as they go through these various stages of grief and recovery. But if people want to get involved, the easiest way to do that is the power of prayer. Prayer works. I've seen it in combat. I've seen it all over the world during disasters like this. But it's also why we take our Billy Graham Rapid Response chaplains with us. They're trained in how to share hope in crisis, to listen and let these people know that they're loved. But Texas is resilient. I saw Texans helping Texas. There were so many people in there with heavy equipment, excavators, even mucking out homes with us that were just next door neighbors. They were not sitting down on their laurels. It was typical of what you would expect of the great state of Texas.
Edward Graham, Samaritan's Purse, just spent a bunch of time there in the Lone Star State with us tonight here on the Hill. Appreciate the time, appreciate the perspective, and of course, all the work down there. Edward, thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Still to come tonight, here on the Hill. Republicans ramping up their investigation when it comes to the last president in the Oval Office.
This is unprecedented, and I think that this adds more fuel to the fire, that there was a cover-up.
It is a very simple question. You see that video there on your screen today. Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the White House doctor for President Biden. Why did he plead the Fifth today? Full panel, other side when we return.
Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
What are you talking about? Here's what I'm talking about, Cuomo.
America's favorite sparring duo with TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
I just tell you the truth backed up by facts.
Tonight at 8, 7 Central, only on NewsNation.
All right. Wow, look at that. I don't know if you noticed in the last segment, it was like really dark behind me. This is what we have going on right now in our nation's capital, a live look. Cats and dogs, kind of, sort of. The White House at Capitol Hill, there is a massive, massive system apparently rolling in. We can hear it, we can see it, and that is the scene right now as we look live here across the district. All right, meantime, do the Democrats have a two-headed dilemma on their hands? This is Dr. Kevin O'Connor, personal physician to President Biden during his term in the White House. Today, the doctor was questioned, not really, during a deposition with the House Oversight Committee as part of an investigation into President Biden's mental acuity. However, his responses were consistently like this.
On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully decline to answer based on the physician-patient privilege and reliance on my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
He pled the Fifth. Reactions from both sides of the aisle just about as you expected.
This is unprecedented, and I think that this adds more fuel to the fire, that there was a cover-up.
Unfortunately, with this rogue DOJ that has decided that it wants to run a contemporaneous investigation, criminal investigation involving the doctor, I think that he did what any good lawyer would advise him to do.
All right, now about 200 miles north from the capital to New York City, because that is where Democrats are trying to figure out what's going on here in the Big Apple, whether or not to support the Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani for mayor. Today, the 33-year-old candidate responded to President Trump hinting at the White House getting involved if Mamdani wins in November.
Donald Trump, who just yesterday spoke about democracy as if it was something that he could either opt in or opt out of, said that if I was elected, then he would have to take over New York City. I am proud to have received the most votes of any Democratic nominee for mayor in a primary in New York City history.
Brand new polling out today shows that he is actually in the plus there when it comes to favorability ratings. Up 4, and you look at Eric Adams, the independent candidate, current mayor, you can see how much underwater he is. The polling there in New York City shows Mamdani up by about 10 points. Full panel with me now. Naveen Nayak is the president for the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Hannah Brandt with us. Look at that lightning. Smiling through the lightning there. Dun, dun, dun. Washington correspondent. Chris Steyerwalt, host of the Hill Sunday Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and Mick Mulvaney, NewsNation contributor, former Trump White House chief of staff in the first administration. Hello to you all. Thanks for being here. Nice to have you in.
Beautiful day for it, Burman.
Beautiful day.
It was a dark and stormy night.
It was a dark and stormy night. Outside of D.C., it is a billion degrees. People are planning their summer vacations or going about their summer vacations and going about their business, right, Naveen? And they're just going to see a headline that says, Joe Biden's doctor pled the fifth. What does your side of the aisle do with that?
I mean, it's not a good headline, but I honestly think the vast majority of Americans are not waking up thinking about Joe Biden, and certainly not Joe Biden's doctor right now. And I think it is, Donald Trump, let's remember, pled the fifth himself in a deposition and said anyone would be a fool not to plead the fifth. And so I think there's a lot of reasons people understand this. I think most Americans were ahead of the Democratic Party in terms of Joe Biden's, fitness. And so I think they had made their decision on Joe Biden more than a year ago in terms of how they felt about him.
You have an unusual take on this.
I'm not sure about a lot of things.
Okay.
I'm sure about this one.
Okay.
He's getting a pardon.
From Donald Trump.
He's absolutely getting a pardon. You can't invoke
Why?
because you cannot invoke your Fifth Amendment privileges if there's no risk of criminal prosecution. Now, Steyerwalt and I were talking about whether or not there might be state liability here, potential state liability, but Trump gives this guy a pardon. No federal crimes. You can't take the fifth.
So there's a DOJ investigation, right?
Fine.
And so you're saying if he's pardoned from any sort of federal crimes, it forces him to talk.
If there's no risk of criminal prosecution, the Fifth Amendment privilege does not attach, okay? And the court can force you to either testify, you have to answer questions, or you go to jail. That's how it works.
It's not a court, though.
But the Congress has the same rights. For the same reason, you can take the fifth in Congress. You can be denied the ability to take the fifth in Congress. Peter Navarro went to jail for not testifying to Congress. So did Steve Bannon.
Right.
To your point, Blake, of Americans are waking up seeing these headlines, I wonder how long this stays the top story. Republicans want it to be, but I would argue even today, it didn't make a huge sound because we're not getting new information. It continues to be Republicans say there was a cognitive decline, and the Biden White House has nothing to say about it.
Well, maybe the doctor knows where the Jeffrey Epstein files are. maybe Pam Bondi will find them over there. I think the business of we're going to get presidential physicians to tell us the real story. Joe Biden's infirmity was not covered up. He was infirm. He was visibly infirm. He was visibly not up to the job. The reason he was forced out of the presidential race by his own party was that it got to the point that it was so ridiculous that it was like, we got to go. We got to go.
Many of the challenges that Republicans have made, Democrats have made in this town have applied to whether or not a law is validly passed, a rule or regulation is validly passed. What they're trying to do is raise the issues.
Yes,
Are the pardons legitimate?
And then,
are everything that Joe Biden signed, is that legitimate?
When Donald Trump leaves office, the President Gallego or whomever will come in, the Democrat will come in and say, we're going to find out whether Donald Trump was in his right mind.
You don't have to wait until he's done. Democrats are going to have the House in a year and a half.
We're going to find out whether
Donald Trump's doctor.
What was his state of mind? Was he on any medication that would have altered his way of thinking?
Absolutely.
What was his state of mind?
Yeah, I mean, is this the new norm? Because it didn't start with this investigation into Biden. There were several into President Trump in his first term. And so are we just going to have constant
There's no bottom.
But what
I'll give you the last word here.
I don't get why he just didn't say, look, I don't talk about my patients. That's a protection. The Fifth Amendment.
You think that's a protection here?
Absolutely.
He did say that, though, in his statement. He did say that he was protecting patients.
Then why take the Fifth?
O'Connor's lawyer last week wrote a letter that said all Americans have certain things in common. Basically, what they say to a doctor is confidential. That is
priests don't have to testify.
Right.
Doctors don't
It's
testify.
100% right, but also 99.99999% of Americans aren't presidents of the United States.
I get that, but if you ask a priest, tell me what the person said in confession, which you don't have to do. You don't take the Fifth. You just say, I don't have to do that. There's another protection for that. There's another protection for doctors when it comes to their patients, and he didn't take that one.
Just up the road, Mamdani, new poll out today. Naveen up 10 in a four-way if. It is him, the Republican, and then Adams and Andrew Cuomo. You ready to embrace Mamdani?
I mean, I'm so confused why this guy is focused on voters' top issue. Republicans should be asking themselves, Donald Trump is in the White House, in theory, because of cost and affordability.
I mean, you say you're confused. There's also the globalized, the intifada.
Let me see.
Well, and you're trying to tell me that pardoning January 6th, are Democrats going to support him fully on everything he says? No, but that is the way politics works. You do not embrace everything that a candidate says. His focus is on making the city affordable.
If Peter Navarro was the Republican nominee for president, wouldn't you be asking us if we were comfortable with that?
Are you really going to? This guy's a state assembly man.
Okay, Peter Navarro is the senior advisor to the president.
And which of you might disagree with
but
some
if Peter's
of
talking
policies,
about the things that are
but we're having a policy thing. I don't think he is outside of the bounds of a political conversation in this country. He's much more in the bounds than Donald Trump is. Like Donald Trump pardoned violent criminals, and we pretend like that's. And Mamdani is much more inside the bounds of political conversation.
I was going to say, if that's the argument in New York, they're not talking about that. There's some folks who are worried about a quote-unquote self-described democratic socialist.
Sure, listen, I think there are several Democrats now people who caucus with the Democratic Party who have that label. I think that's going to be a conversation in this country, and I'll tell you why it's going to become meaningful, is Medicaid.
Okay.
Is that socialism? That is the government offering health care to people who cannot afford it. Republicans are saying, we're done with that. People are on their own.
Let me get Hannah and Kristen before we got to run.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's interesting. He's making some of the same arguments as, like you said, President Trump on the campaign trail, this grievance about affordability. And a lot of moderate Democrats have pointed that out. They say, I don't agree with everything he's saying, but he's focused on costs, and that's what people care about.
Eric Adams could get out of the race and make it a more interesting race. Eric Adams is fighting with the Republican nominee for 30. They're fighting over the same 30% of the vote and who can go on Fox News and who can appeal to this minority. If Adams, and I think Adams, who is a Trump in the Trump orbit, I think he's there as spoiler as much as anything else. I think he's there just as much as a spoiler to do anything. Because I think if Cuomo went head-to-head with Mamdani in a general election, I think that would be an interesting race.
Got to run, got to leave it there. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Still to come on the other side. Remember the conversation, and there was a question, what are these two talking about, especially when they were laughing? Now we know. And coming up on Elizabeth Vargas Report, she's talking to President Obama's former White House physician, what he thinks today about what happened inside the halls of the Capitol. Other side of the break. What were Obama and Trump talking about? All right, if you're just getting home tonight, some of the top stories that are trending on thehill.com. We talked about this earlier in the show. Trump administration pulls the lever to threaten Harvard's accreditation. This is a story as well that's not going away anytime soon. Marjorie Taylor Greene, people not going to accept memo saying that there's no Epstein client list. And then the big event over at the White House today, the president hosted African leaders. One of them, the leader of Senegal, asked the president to build a golf course over in his country. To check out these stories and more, all you have to do is scan the QR code on your screen or go to thehill.com for the very latest. All right, do you remember this viral moment from the National Cathedral prior to the funeral service for former President Jimmy Carter? The images of Barack Obama, then President-elect Donald Trump appearing to chum it up like fraternity brothers had the world wondering what were they talking about, especially given their contentious history. Well, according to a new book, How Trump Retook the White House and the Democrats Lost America, which is previewed in Axios, the two took time at the funeral to talk about golf. The authors write that President Trump even reveled about his courses all over the world. So while the memes were flying and internet sleuths and lip readers were weighing in on what those two men were trying to talk about, especially given where they are on the political aisle, the answer all along very well could have been something that golfers all over this country suspected to begin with. Golf talk between the two presidents was always a gimme. I thank you so much for watching us tonight here on The Hill. We'll be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock Eastern, in what is a raining, look at that lightning as well here in Washington. I'm Blake Burman. Hope you have a good one. Elizabeth starts now.